illness that many still refuse to acknowledge. Black Dog, a depression tale, in 35 minutes, here on BBC One.
This is BBC One in the West. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Michael Buerk and Chris Vasher. The government's backed down over medical tests for troops who served in the Balkans. They'll be screened for contamination from NATO's depleted uranium shells. Voter resistance as the politicians limber up for the general election. Arrivederci Lazio, England's new football saviour, leaves Rome under a cloud. And the night the moon went red, the most striking lunar eclipse for a decade.
In the West tonight, after the tomato attack, angry farmers make their point. We gauge reaction as the PM goes on the hustings in Bristol. And a court hears how a man was beaten up in front of his family, but was it racially motivated?
Good evening. The Ministry of Defence has given in to pressure to provide medical tests for soldiers who served in the Balkans and think they may have been contaminated by depleted uranium weapons. A voluntary screening programme will be set up for tens of thousands of servicemen and women who were sent to Bosnia and Kosovo. Concern has been growing amongst European nations that there might be a link between the uranium weapons and leukemia and other illnesses affecting some Balkan veterans. David Schuckman reports.
In Kosovo today, radiation experts were checking one of the 100 sites attacked by depleted uranium weapons during the conflict. 8 locations have been found to have higher than normal radioactivity, fueling fears right across Europe. The UN's chief administrator in Kosovo says that levels are generally not above average, but he remains concerned.
We took and are still taking this threat very seriously.
Even as the analysis goes on, the perception in many countries is that depleted uranium weapons have caused cancer among peacekeepers. This is why several European governments have launched urgent screening programs to get at the facts, while Britain kept saying that wasn't needed until today.
The statement, Mr. John Speller.
The Armed Forces Minister John Speller found himself rushed to the Commons where, under pressure from Downing Street, he announced a U-turn. That there could now be tests, he said.
Any individual who believes their health may have been damaged by service in the Balkans should seek medical advice. And if their doctor considers that there is evidence that depleted uranium might have contributed to ill health, then tests for uranium levels will be carried out.
But for British veterans watching the announcement, it fell far short of the full inquiry they've long campaigned for, and they were left deeply upset.
I had hopes. I was looking forward to maybe Thursday to someone that was going to come with this, and they brought it forward, and things are we're no better off.
What does the future hold for you, do you think?
Nothing.
Back in Westminster, opposition politicians also claimed the move did not go far enough.
One of the features of this statement, which suggests it was rushed out in a bit of a hurry, is the absence of detail about the voluntary screening programme and the extent to which the government proposes to cooperate with other NATO allies in the sharing of information. I've no doubt whatsoever that the government will have to go further.
The French military showed off their depleted uranium weapons today to make a point that British generals would agree with, that no other metal has the density, the weight needed in modern warfare. Controversial, but effective. The depleted uranium allows a shell to punch through armour, but as it impacts, it creates a cloud of uranium oxide dust, and no one knows for sure if this can cause cancer.
This situation is quite unusual and not something we've seen before. So it certainly does suggest that we need to perhaps screen servicemen who are serving in Bosnia for early signs of leukemia or other cancers.
Here at the Ministry of Defence tonight, they'll be hoping that by giving ground as they have, they'll put an end to the outcry. But that isn't very likely, because in at least 2 major NATO allies, Germany and Italy, ministers are now calling for a ban on depleted uranium. And here, veterans of the Gulf War say they still deserve far better treatment. The controversy isn't over. David Schuckman, BBC News at the Ministry of Defence.
Italian peacekeepers, it's claimed, have suffered the most deaths caused by depleted uranium. The The Defence Ministry in Rome is investigating the deaths of as many as 8 soldiers who served in the Balkans. There's growing alarm there, and the Italian government has called on NATO to suspend the use of depleted uranium. From Italy, our special correspondent Ben Brown reports.
To his parents, he was the perfect son. 23-year-old Salvatore Vacca was fit, healthy and happy, until he went to Bosnia, that is. In 1999, he died from leukemia, and his family suspect depleted uranium was the cause of it.
I'm very angry. If uranium was being used out there and other dangerous substances that cause illness, then our young men should have been warned of the risks they might be taking.
Italy was one of the first countries to start screening its Balkan peacekeepers for cancer. It's a lead now followed by Britain. But some of these Italian soldiers now stationed in Bosnia are still worried. If they won't tell me the whole story, he says, I want to be sent home, because it isn't right to come here and risk my life. We came to protect, not to get a disease. The Italian army has set up this telephone hotline to offer advice and information to the worried relatives of its soldiers. The Ministry of Defence in London has no plans for such a service, but in Italy they say it's vital to calm the growing wave of panic.
Mothers or wives that are quite worried about their men, because their family that are here in Italy, they watch television, they listen a lot about this problem of depleted uranium. They want to know exactly what's going on.
È colpa di un materiale radioattivo.
The scare is getting saturation coverage in the Italian media. This TV talk show last night was called War on Uranium. It featured a young corporal, Valeri Melis, who's had chemotherapy to fight off cancer. He too served in the Balkans. After the show, he was comforted by one of his commanders, but he told me that is not enough.
Precautions should have been taken not only to protect soldiers like me, but also civilians who live in the Balkans. If it is the cause of my illness, this depleted uranium should never have been used at all.
With several Italian peacekeepers killed by leukemia and more seriously ill, it's perhaps no surprise that there is mounting alarm here over the use of depleted uranium. Some politicians are even calling for all Italian soldiers to be pulled out of the Balkans. Emotions are running extremely high, and NATO cannot afford to ignore them. Ben Brown, BBC News, Rome.
The Prime Minister has promised Britain's biggest ever investment in schools, hospitals and transport. At a speech in Bristol, he claimed Labour had brought about a successful economy, achieved, as he put it, through choice, not chance. The Conservatives, meanwhile, launched a poster campaign with the theme, "You paid the tax, so where's the money gone?"
The trouble with getting out campaigning is it's never all one way. The first tomato of election year, here it plummets. But the slight indignity in a dry cleaning bill was a price worth paying for Tony Blair's journey to Bristol. His message that prosperity comes from Labour choices, not chance, should last longer than the memory of a little ballistic fruit.
We are going to be putting in, over the next few years, indeed starting with this last year, the largest ever sustained investment in public services Britain has ever seen. And at every stage, that money will be accompanied by reform to deliver higher standards of quality in public services.
That's probably Tony Blair's core election message to an audience which was Labour dominated but not hand-picked. This